And
All right,
therefore,
it does appear that he's going to be speaking. Nima, if you want to hold on for just a few moments.
He's doing a fantastic job. So we have Marco. Go ahead, please.
Mr. President, I wanted to ask you, Iran executed 3 people this week.
Terrible.
You have vowed strong action in the past. What message would you send?
Well, we've been hitting them awfully hard. I mean, I don't know if you can possibly get hit harder, but these are thugs and animals and horrible people. But you can't hit anybody harder than we've hit them. But I'm not surprised. They executed 3 young people for protesting.
And do you plan to escort those ships through the Strait of Hormuz with or without allies?
We're doing very well there. We're doing very well overall. We don't use the strait. The United States. We don't need it. Europe needs it. Korea, Japan, China, a lot of other people. So they'll have to get involved a little bit on that one.
Do you still want South Korea support the United States?
Yeah, what about it?
Do you still want South Korea support?
Well, I love South Korea. We have a great relationship with South Korea. We're helping South Korea a lot.
Mr. President, do you think Israel will be ready to end the war when you're ready?
I think so. It's a very good one. We want victory. And then, how will the operation? Well, I may have a or I may not, but how would I ever say that to a reporter? If I said that to a reporter, Marco would say, "Please, sir, let's bring you over to the helicopter immediately." Right? No, I can't tell you that. It's certainly a place that's people are talking about, but I can't say. Yeah.
Are you ruling out
How will
troops
the
there, though?
Operation Epic Fury affect talks with Russia on Ukraine?
What about it?
Are the talks on back burner right now because of the
We're talking about it, and I think it'll get done.
When do you expect the next round of talks to take place?
They
By that, he said the war.
their Navy, their Air Force. We've knocked out everything. We're roaming free. From a military standpoint, all they're doing is clogging up the strait. But from a military standpoint, they're finished.
So how much longer can the American people expect?
You said opening the Strait of Hormuz is a simple military maneuver.
Very simple.
Yeah, but what did you mean by that?
It's a simple military maneuver. It's relatively safe, but you need a lot of help in the sense of you need ships, you need volume. And NATO could help us, but they so far haven't had the courage to do so. And others could help us, but, we don't use it. At a certain point, it'll open itself at a certain point. But we've defeated the leadership is gone, the Navy is gone, the Air Force is gone, the anti-aircraft equipment that they have, the radar they have is all gone. Everything's gone. The strait itself, the actual strait, how are you? The strait itself is, we're doing a good job. But it would be nice if the countries, including China, if the countries that use it, China uses it 90% of their energy. Japan is 95% of the energy. It would be nice if those countries would get involved.
Drop still safe at CNI?
What?
Drop still safe at CNI? And have you spoken to that?
I thought she did a good job yesterday.
The American bases in Europe. Lindsey Graham has asked for you to reconsider the American bases in Spain, in Germany, after what they have done in the Strait of Hormuz. What's your take?
Well, it deserves. He's right about asking that, and I think NATO's gone down a long way because they haven't. I mean, they should be helping with the Strait. They get much of their energy from the Strait of Hormuz, and if Lindsey Graham said that, and don't forget, he was the big NATO guy for a while, and now he's not. And a lot of senators and congressmen, they're very upset with the fact that NATO has done nothing.
So Pompeo is calling for a ceasefire in the Middle East and to reopen dialogue. Would you say that's
Well, look, we can have dialogue, but I don't want to do a ceasefire. You don't do a ceasefire when you're literally obliterating the other side. They don't have a Navy. They don't have an Air Force. They don't have any equipment they don't have any spotters. They don't have anti-aircraft. They don't have radar, and their leaders have all been killed at every level. We're not looking to do that. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, he did? Oh, Chuck Norris, 86 years old, on the house. He died in a house where I'm moving a lot. Corner third. Yeah, he was Chuck Norris. He was a great guy. He was a really good, tough cookie. He didn't want to fight him. He was a tough, great guy, and he was a great supporter. Wow, that's too bad. Tell his family, I appreciate it.
Point that we have, we were able to get yet another camera that's still following President Trump as he's taking questions. What I'm going to do is play it from the point that we got that new camera angle. It's about 2 minutes so far in length as he's still speaking live with moments ago, just so we don't miss any of what the president's message is. Let's listen.
I don't know. I think that's great support because CNN came out with a poll today that I'm at 100%. They said they've never seen a poll like that. The CNN poll said I'm at 100%, and they've never seen that before, which is an honor. I was impressed that CNN would do that. But as far as troops are concerned, I can't tell you what we're doing.
Mr. President, Mr. President, you took issue with Australia, Japan, and South Korea this week.
Yeah, I was very surprised.
Very surprised about Australia, and what would you like them to do?
Well, we should get involved, and I was a little bit surprised that they said no, because we always say yes to them.
What did Australia say no to? Australia say no to?
They were really pretty much our first ally, all over the world, first ally, and they didn't want us to use the island, the so-called island, which for some reason they gave up rights to it, and I was a little surprised at the UK, to be honest with you. They should have acted a lot faster. Should have acted a lot faster.
Let's go. Did you see that your former press secretary, Sarah Sanders, was asked to leave a restaurant by staff who felt threatened by her politics?
Well, her politics are right down the center. She's a good person, and that shouldn't have happened. Where did that take place? Here or in Arkansas?
In Arkansas.
Wow. In Arkansas. That's very surprising. I love Arkansas. I won that state by so much. I think that Sarah's going to be just fine. But it's too bad. She's a good woman, Sarah.
Rates of oil is way up. Stop Arkansas.
Gonna go up. Gonna go down. No. We're not giving a nuclear weapon to terrorist thugs, and we're knocking the hell out of them. Their Navy's gone. Their Air Force is gone. Their leaders are gone. Their anti-aircraft is gone. Everything's gone. And no, I expected worse, actually. I thought that oil prices would go much higher when I did this. We just set every record in the book with Dow, with the S&P. Dow at 50,000, S&P at 8,000, 7,000, at levels, at speed like nobody's ever seen before. But I said I have to go off from that path, and I have to take a little journey. We have to get and he would agree, but he's not going to say it. And this is not St. Patrick's Day, by the way. What are you doing with that tie? But we had to go off on a circuitous path and take care of business, and we are in the process of doing it. And I'll tell you, I think we're weeks ahead of schedule. My Secretary of State is very happy. You have a question for Marco? Yes. How soon?
And what are you guys hearing from your Senate colleagues about the chances of the Save America Act?
Doing okay. Voter ID. You have to have citizenship to vote. And I'm hearing very good things. I mean, I was hearing negative things because the Democrats are all against voter ID. They're all against citizenship to vote. You like the transgender thing with utilization of your children, all of the things that we talked about. Where we added to no men and women sports, right? You know that. We added that. And when you add them all up, whether you take 4 or 5, I think they're all 95 to 99% issues. I hear it's going, it should be an easy path. But we need Democrat votes. They don't want to approve voter ID because they cheat. They don't want to approve citizenship. In other words, we want to have citizenship in order to vote. You have to prove your citizenship. The Democrats don't want to do that. You know why, Peter? You know why? Because they want to cheat, Peter. Now, speaking of something that's more pleasant, see that? It's going to be the greatest ballroom anywhere in the world. Nothing like it. And they just started today one of the biggest boards of concrete that's ever been seen in Washington. When they're doing the construction, does it ever wake you up? It makes me happy when I hear those pile drivers. My wife doesn't love it, but I love the sound. I love the sound of concrete. I love the sound of pile drivers. Mr. President, how are you, Mr. President?
Think Proline short on same game parlays? Not anymore. This ain't the old Proline.
Right now, I want to pop this up on your screen as Iran has publicly executed 3 people in a public hanging, all of whom were arrested during the regime's brutal crackdown on protesters several months ago. Take a look at this post coming in from the New York Post. One of them was 19-year-old champion wrestler Soleil Mohammadi, who was reportedly tortured to confess to the crime of waging war against God. The Islamic Republic of Iran ignoring a U.S. State Department warning not to go through with the executions. And of course, that's a warning that President Trump had issued over the last several months as well. Reports out of Iran, as I mentioned, Jens Fellow for American Strategy to talk much more about everything here. Jonathan, thank you so much, as always, for taking the time to join us here and help break it down.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be back.
And first off, I wanted to start by asking you about the message that it seems Iran is trying to send by doing these public executions in public there in spots where a lot of people can watch.
Yes, I mean, certainly this horrific news is sadly even more horrific because it's unsurprising. This is something the Iranian regime did in peacetime. I think they were the world's second leading executioner of their own citizens, and often would do so in grotesque and public ways to send a message. These are the actions of a regime that knows that its own people are its own number one enemy. And also, I think this particular incident is emblematic of the regime's messaging, which is, in this war, we're persevering by being more violent than we've ever been before. You see this not only with these executions, but in a lot of the replacement has announced for leading officials that have been killed in U.S. and Israeli airstrikes. Since the war began, everyone from the supreme leader down to intelligence ministers and mid-level officials, they're replaced by people who are not as competent or respected inside the Iranian system for sure. But that's not the point. The point is to send the message that we, the Iranian regime, are doubling down on defiance. We will not buckle, and we, the Iranians, will make this war longer and more painful than we think our enemies can sustain.
We also know that several months ago, when the protests were kind of ramping up there, and we saw thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that were crowding into the streets, there were talks of those executions, and President Trump said he had spoken with officials there, and those executions were not going to happen. But now, as this information gets out, how can we expect President Trump to respond? Do you think he will?
So, yeah, I think, we're in a slightly different context now, given that the war is already ongoing. I think with President Trump right now has a lot of priorities to focus on. Number one is trying to open the Strait of Hormuz and reduce Iran's military capabilities to threaten international shipping. But I think what we're seeing right now in terms of Iran's internal behavior is part of a larger trend that so far has been largely led by the Israelis, which is trying to using Israel's incredible intelligence gathering capabilities to find and take out Iranian officials. And this is one of the Iranian regime's reactions to that, but also using those executions as a way to signal to the Iranian people that we, the United States and Israel, we support your efforts to do away with this regime. As Trump and Netanyahu said at the very start, U.S. and Israeli operations are meant to erode and degrade Iran's military capabilities, both to destabilize the region, but also to suppress their own people. And as those are taken out, increasingly, then the Iranian people, we hope that you will, as Trump said, take back your government.
Should we expect to see more of those demonstrations then? Because again, we saw them for weeks upon weeks with a lot of people packing the streets. And I want to pop up this video once again, just to give you a look at some of the video from a couple months ago. Should we expect scenes like this one to happen again in the coming days, weeks, and maybe months?
I think we should definitely expect the protests will not go away. The Iranian people have shown that despite all the horrible things the regime does to the country, including executing and gunning down in the streets thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of Iranian protesters earlier this year, that the Iranian people know that ultimately it's a question of when, not if, the regime collapses. And I think, one of the interesting developments we've seen recently is now that the United States and Israel have achieved air superiority over Western Iran, at least where a lot of Iran's major urban areas are, that Israel has what they call a stand-in capability to put small attack drones to monitor and take out the checkpoints set up by the Basij, which is the internal security forces, which I think we've seen so far creates a new equation here and really forces the regime to rethink how they go out and try to brutalize their own people, which is never far from their mind, even as they fight an external war for their survival.
As far as we understand, is it possible for anyone to get a fair trial there in Iran? Because we've heard from human rights activists who have said that this wrestler was coerced into saying that he had gone against God. And I mean, there are so many questions there. So is it even possible to get a fair trial?
Certainly not. And that's by design. As you said, offense against God, this is how a self-proclaimed theocracy like the Islamic Republic believes it functions. And it resembles in certain ways a lot of totalitarian regimes that we've seen in the past, the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, China today, where the whole point is that people do not get a fair trial, because if they have a hope for seeking justice and petitioning their government for grievances in legitimate ways, then the regime, like the Islamic Republic, ceases to be the Islamic Republic and it starts to sign its own death warrant. We certainly saw this in the regime's response to the protests earlier this year, where the Iranian people were coming out and saying, we want water, we want electricity, we want a currency that is not completely devalued overnight. And rather than listening to these grievances, the regime turned around and used military-style suppression to gun people down in the streets on a massive scale.
At this point, do we have any idea the condition of Iran's new supreme leader? Because he issued a message. It was a message that was attributed to him earlier on today, essentially another threat to President Trump and the U.S., of course, also to Israel. But we don't even know if he's the one making those statements, right?
That's correct. I think as President Trump said, he made the Mojtaba, the new supreme leader, the son of the previous leader, Ali Khamenei, may very well have been injured in U.S. airstrikes. Or Israeli airstrikes. We heard that at the beginning of the war. There were even widespread reports that he had been killed in the same set of strikes that took out his father. But as you said, really, he is there to be essentially a figurehead, a symbol, both to the outside world, but more importantly to the Iranian people, that the regime is not going anywhere. It is not going to soften its policies, even under duress of major attack. But as you said, I think one thing we're currently seeing play out and has been underway for a long time, even before the war, is it's the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, who really pull the strings. They controlled a lot of the economy before the war. They were responsible for carrying out the suppression of Iran's people. And now that they're in the middle of a war, I think it's the IRGC who are essentially, by and large, taking over the country. And Mojtaba, the new supreme leader, may as much be a mouthpiece for that as anything else.
And tomorrow does mark 3 weeks since all of this kind of unfolded with Operation Epic Fury. So what are you going to be watching for here in the coming hours and days?
So I think, it's probably said a lot, but the operations are approaching a pivot point. I don't think they're at a culmination point yet. There's a lot more for the United States and Israel to do. But I think given the incredible operational successes we've seen in recent weeks, taking out Iran's air defenses, a lot of their ballistic missile launch capability, I think increasingly we're turning to taking out Iran's maritime capabilities, its ability to keep threatening the Strait and essentially shut it down, even though it has not defeated the U.S. Navy in a head-on battle. I think that's going to be a certain center of gravity. But at some point, and I understand why they're not focusing on them right now, at some point for President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu to declare this war a success, even if the regime does not collapse, they will need to show that they've effectively or meaningfully neutralized Iran's nuclear program. And in addition to the sites that were hit earlier in this war and last June, that's going to require some tough decision-making about how to go after potentially some secret sites in Iran that are deeply buried. And we hear a lot about the U.S. moving Marines and potentially other forces for a ground operation along the Straits or in the Persian Gulf at Karg Island. That's obviously very important. But an even bigger underlying question is will ground forces be needed to address those deeply buried secret Iranian nuclear facilities that were not touched so far in this conflict or last year?
And before I let you go, one more question here, because we've heard from several officials there in the UAE about some of the drones that have been flying overhead fired by Iran. Same situation with a lot of those Gulf Arab states. What does it say to you that Iran is not just firing at Israel, but you also see them targeting U.S., officials, U.S. operations there in those Gulf Arab countries?
The YouTube music app has the power to sense what you like from the moment you open it.
So I think this gets to the root of how Iran's strategy is different in this war than in previous rounds of conflict with the United States and Israel, which is Iran has made clear that we view this war as a fight for our survival, the regime's survival, and the previous restrictions that may have been imposed on the breadth of our targets or how long we're willing to fight the war, those are all gone now. We, the Iranians, want to make the United States feel the pain both directly but also indirectly. There's only so much damage Iran can do directly to our military forces. So they're retaliating by what they think are weak points, which is the resolve of our Gulf allies to absorb a lot of this punishment and keep going as it strangles their economies and their livelihoods. And also, I think it should not be discounted the help that Iran has gotten from Russia here, which is targeting, as you mentioned, U.S. officials across the region, our embassies, our consulates, and some of our key military capabilities. And so I expect the Iranians will keep doing that as long as they can, especially because even if their missiles are reliably shot down, they've shown that if a couple drones get through, that can cause disproportionate damage. And that is part of Iran's larger goal.
Jonathan Ruhi over at GINSA, thank you so much, as always, for taking the time to join us. Anything we missed? I know we covered a lot of ground, but anything you want to make sure to mention here before I let you go?
I would say one thing that is now increasingly becoming an issue of contention, really, is as this war goes on, will America need its global partners and allies to help out in various ways with this fight? We've obviously seen tensions in recent days between the United States and some of our allies in Europe and Asia. And I think, regardless of concerns or disagreements over how and why the war started, I think really now, given what we've discussed here about Iran's ability to broaden the war and turn a regional conflict into something with global economic consequences, coalition building and alliance management for the United States, we've done a great job of it with Israel so far, despite some minor disagreements. But now I think this is going to require a more global effort for the United States to lead in various ways, even if that does not involve our allies and partners doing actual fighting.
All right. Jonathan, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We definitely appreciate it.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
States Israel thought we could. Iranians are in an excellent position to bank the international economy.
I really look forward to seeing their doomsday prophecies shatter at the face of reality. We want them to stop dreaming about wiping Israel off the map by the year 2040, which was an official Iranian goal and policy.
Israel are guilty of the supreme international crime of aggression under Article 51 of the UN Charter. Now let's turn to Mr. Carnicus.
Conricus, the N is before the R, Finkelstein.
Whatever your name is.
I don't understand why there's one rule for Israel and another rule for everybody else has got them. Israel's begun a ground operation in Lebanon as it continues to escalate a major second front as war in Iran and Iran's proxies. The risks, obviously, are enormous, but for Israel, so too are the potential rewards. Israel would be a much safer place without constant attacks from a country that vowed repeatedly to wipe it from the map. Israel would be a lone rock of stability in a neighborhood of countries hobbled by a power vacuum. Israel would benefit immediately from trade ties with the rich Gulf states who've long cited Iran's menacing as a reason for not taking sides. Israel would cement its place as the region's only nuclear-armed nation with the most advanced military and the deepest intelligence network. It would, in effect, be a superpower with no break on whatever ambitions it has. Now, putting aside the many ways this war could go horribly wrong, it's no surprise that Netanyahu says he's dreamed of it for 40 years. It's no surprise that Israel has pressed successive US presidents to join the war, often as Antony Blinken revealed, by threatening to strike first if necessary. It's no surprise that Israelis support the war overwhelmingly. But what is missing in all of this is a clear and consistent case for why any of these benefits are of equal interest to Israel's partner in this war, the United States. President Trump has reneged on his pro-peace pledges and taught some of his closest supporters to launch an unpopular and expensive war on the eve of elections which could condemn him to lame duck irrelevance. And his most prominent cheerleaders, Ben Shapiro and Ted Cruz to Mark Levin and Lindsey Graham, are the most avowedly pro-Israel commentators who have all called themselves never-Trumpers in the past. It's not necessarily conspiratorial to make this war all about Israel. The war's supporters have made it literally all about Israel. And this week, Mark Levin said his critics are just as evil as Nazis.
Is giving aid and comfort, propaganda to the enemy, as are individuals who I call the woke right neo-fascists, who are stirring the anti-Semitism pot, who are stirring the trash Christian pot. They are no different than the same voices we heard in the 1930s, and just as disgusting, evil, and reprehensible.
Pretty ridiculous to compare the right-wing commentator Nazis. Joe Kent, who resigned as Trump's counter-terrorism chief over a war he said was at the behest of the Israeli lobby, has been condemned as a neo-Nazi, Jew-hating Israel basher. Well, I've personally been accused of attacking or hating Israel or Israelis for pointing out that this very right-wing administration currently running Israel has itself said that Israel is the reason the US is at war. So before we debate all of this, here's a definitive guide to why everyone is talking about Israel.
I think if we didn't do it first, they would have done it to Israel and give us a shot if that was possible.
That if Israel fired upon Iran and took action against Iran to take out the missiles, then they would have immediately retaliated against U.S. personnel and assets.
Israel would have been wiped out. They would have had a nuclear weapon within 2 weeks after.
There absolutely was an imminent threat, and the imminent threat was that we knew that if Iran was attacked, and we believed they would be attacked, that they would immediately come after us. And we were not going to sit there and absorb a blow before we responded.
Israel faced an existential risk, and they were prepared to strike Iran alone. If that happened, Iran was very likely to target our troops.
We did it because we have some good allies there. We have some great Middle Eastern countries there, Israel there.
Well, Jonathan Conricus and Norman Finkelstein will be joining us in a few minutes for a fascinating debate. But we begin today's coverage with Professor John Mearsheimer, a regular visitor to Uncensored, who's written and spoken about all of this for decades. Professor Mearsheimer, welcome back to Uncensored.
I'm glad to be here, Piers, and I'm glad to see that you've recovered from your fall.
Thank you. Nearly there. Back in the studio, down to one crutch, and life goes on, thankfully. Let me just ask you straight off the top. A lot of people on the sort of vehemently pro-Israeli side tend to say, why do you keep making this about Israel? Why do you keep talking about Israel? When they themselves constantly talk about Israel, and from my perspective, often try and silence legitimate debate about Netanyahu's government and what they're up to by branding people who criticize it in any way anti-Semitic and so on. You can't escape the Israeli influence, not least in this war in Iran, right?
I think that Israeli influence and the Israel lobby's influence in leading the United States into this war is quite obvious. There's just an abundance of evidence that Israel pushed us into this war and that the lobby helped. And of course, whenever that happens and somebody points it out, that person is accused of being an anti-Semite or a self-hating Jew. But this is ridiculous. The question is whether the evidence supports the claim or not. And the debate should be fought over the evidence, not devolve to name calling, which of course exactly is what is happening here. But the fact is, Piers, there's overwhelming evidence that the lobby and Israel itself helped in a major way to push the United States into this war.
Well, we just have to take Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, at his own word before he was persuaded that he hadn't said what he'd said, because he said it on camera. And he said that when asked why did America have to preemptively strike at Iran, he said because America had been notified by another country, clearly Israel, that they were going to attack Iran, and that the inevitable consequence would be that Iran would respond against American interests, including military bases in the Gulf and so on. And therefore, America had to get in first and preemptively go in with the Israelis. It seemed at the time very convoluted, but very revealing too, because as we now know from Antony Blinken, I've talked about this many times on the show since he said it, because it's so relevant, I think. Netanyahu had tried to do this with both Presidents Obama and Biden. He'd said, look, I'm going to attack Iran. Are you with me or not? And they both said no. And then he didn't attack Iran. And so there are many who do believe that Netanyahu, we saw Trump, I think, 8 times in the run-up to this war, that he basically bamboozled, maybe not bamboozled, but forcefully persuaded Trump that he was A, going to do this, and B, America had to be with the Israelis.
Yeah, I think it's not only Secretary of State Rubio who said that, but the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, said it. And furthermore, Lindsey Graham, who is a super supporter of Israel, has said that he worked hard with Prime Minister Netanyahu to give Netanyahu advice on how to convince President Trump to attack Iran. So you see all sorts of evidence of Netanyahu's fingerprints on this war.
We're now at a stage in this war where thousands of Marines have now been dispatched to the conflict zone. The Iranians, who must know they can't compete with the Americans and Israelis with their combined military firepower in the air or at sea or anywhere else, frankly, militarily, but they can compete in this strategic economic way. Do you agree with that?
Sure. I mean, I think what's going on here, Piers, is that the United States and Israel thought that we could win a quick and decisive victory, either by decapitating the regime or some form shock and awe campaign for the first few days of the war. And the Iranians would then throw up their hands and they would submit to our demands. And in fact, President Trump has said that he was told that there was a good chance that the Iranians would close down the Strait of Hormuz, but he ignored that warning because he thought we would win a victory before that became a viable option for the Iranians. But what's happened here is that we did not achieve a quick and decisive victory that the Iranians prepared for. And that's a war that the Iranians are in an excellent position to prevail in. If you think about the various steps up the escalation ladder that we can take, what you see is that the Iranians can match us at every point, and they can cause not only enormous damage for the countries in the region and for the United States military forces that are located there, but maybe even more importantly for the international economy. They have the ability, as you go up the escalation ladder, to tank the international economy. This would be catastrophic. So we are now in a situation, having failed to achieve a quick and decisive victory, where we could lose in a really serious way.
So if you were advising Donald Trump, which is, I have to say, at the unlikely end of the expectation ladder, but if you were, what advice would you give him? He clearly, I think, wants to get out of this, but he doesn't seem to really know how he can do that, which doesn't look like a crushing defeat or retreat. What would you advise him to do, which would be a skillful and achievable way of extricating America from this war?
I've thought long and hard about this, and I've talked to a number of very smart people, a number of my friends who are what I would call spinmeisters. They can figure out almost always how to get out of a mess. And I don't think anybody can come up with a good solution for solving this problem. What most people say is that what President Trump should do is declare victory and get out. I mean, he can do that, but it will be seen as a humiliating defeat for the United States. And furthermore, you run into the problem that the Iranians themselves might not agree to end the war. The United States can quit, but the Israelis and the Iranians may continue fighting. And again, as I said, the Iranians have a lot of cards to play here. They can do a lot of damage. So even if we walk away, it's not clear that that solves the problem. And then again, where I started, the United States will look like it suffered a humiliating defeat. So I think that President Trump has got himself into a situation where there is really no good exit strategy.
Yeah, that's the way I see it. And I'm still completely baffled why politically, never mind anything else, he thought this was a good time to take the biggest gamble he's ever taken, because he's got the midterms coming. You know, already he was looking like he might lose the House. He could lose the Senate over this. And then that's pretty much it. You know, as a president, if you don't have any control of any part of Congress, there's not much you can do. You can fly a few executive orders around, but otherwise you're extremely limited in your power. And of course, the other irony of this is that Russia is already emerging as one of the big beneficiaries of what is going on, because the sanctions have been lifted. They're making enormous amounts of money from this, which could carry on the longer it goes on. And you've got to look at it and say, how does a war you've launched against Iran that ends up with Russia benefiting with higher prices for its own stuff, degraded potential Chinese backing for new products? How does any of that be aid for the States?
Well, it's not. To your initial point as to how he could have possibly got himself into this mess, I think it's very important to understand that he thought that the Iranian regime was very vulnerable. It was very weak, and that the United States could cause it to topple with great ease. You want to remember that before the war, Armada into the Middle East, Steve Witkoff has told us that President Trump was surprised that the Iranians did not throw up their hands and surrender before the war started. In other words, President Trump expected the mere threat of force from this armada to cause Iran to win. And of course, that didn't happen. And then he went to war thinking just a little bit of military force for days. This wouldn't be a long war. We would knock off the regime. And I think that his success in Venezuela, where he was able to kidnap Maduro and put an end to that conflict very quickly, gave him additional confidence that he could, in a sense, float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. But the fact is that that didn't happen. Again, once it doesn't happen, he's in a catastrophic situation. But I don't think he thought for 1 second that that would happen. And again, that's what could dismiss Pentagon's warning that it was likely that the Iranians would shut down the strait. And furthermore, the warning that the Iranians would engage in horizontal escalation. They would not simply attack Israel, they would attack American assets in the Gulf, would attack the Gulf states themselves. He just didn't see this coming. But once it came, he's in a mess that I don't see how he gets out of.
Yeah, it's very difficult to see how he gets out of it easily, certainly. Professor Mearsheimer, always good to have your analysis. Thank you very much.
You're more than welcome, Piers.
Well, returning to Uncensored to debate this, I'm joined by the political scientist and activist Norman Finkelstein, author of the new book, Gaza's Grave Diggers, an inquiry into corruption in high places, and the retired Lieutenant Colonel IDF International spokesman, Jonathan Conricus. Well, welcome to both of you. Jonathan Conricus, we've talked a lot about this. When I hear Professor Mearsheimer there, it could be incredibly difficult for Donald Trump and the Americans to extricate from something which may not be playing out how they anticipated or hoped. But it may be at the same time that Israel has completely different agenda here, that Israel would be quite happy to carry on having an extended war against what they see as the great enemy. We've had Netanyahu talking about a 40-year, sort of dream of this moment coming, and now able to carry it through. I've talked to myself several times. It's always been Iran is the big problem. Iran is the one with all the tentacles. Iran is the one we have to take out. He's made no secret of this. So it may be that you've got two big nations here with completely different wishes for how it plays out, in the sense that now it is where it is. Donald Trump is probably thinking, I think, wouldn't put words in his mouth, but he changes a lot of what he says all the time. He's probably thinking, I need an off-ramp here. And Netanyahu may be thinking the complete opposite. He's happy to have a very level ramp carrying on for months or as long as it takes. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I'd say shalom from Israel. Thanks for having me on again. I'm happy, this is recorded. I'm happy that the video will be out in eternity. That's the fun part about making assessments. And I will really enjoy seeing all the doomsday experts and the instant military analysts and people who now claim to understand the Iranian regime, the Iran conflict, and understand the Middle East very well, and maritime warfare and many other things. And I really look forward to seeing their doomsday prophecies shatter at the face of reality when Israel and the US will be able to not only reopen the Strait of Hormuz and force the Iranians back in positions, when the US and Israel will help the Iranian people actually reclaim their freedom and get rid of this foreign oppression that has been governing the people of Iran for 47 years. And I look forward to the time when Israel and Iran, a free Iran, free of Islamist oppression, will reestablish diplomatic ties and trade and prosperity. I think, and I'm a realist. I don't think a lot of people can, blame me for being rosy-eyed or detached from reality. I stand on pretty solid ground. Most of the time, my analysis is usually based on my military experience experience and how I understand and Gulf countries, it's not even a contest. And I strongly dispute what the distinguished professor said before, that Iran can escalate this horizontally and the US won't have anything to do in order to retaliate. Frankly, respectfully, he doesn't have a clue. There are so many things that both Israel and the US can do that can totally cripple the regime and can really reduce Iran's infrastructure, economy, ability to trade, ability to people looking at the oil price and wishing it go to $200 and imagining the Iranian regime has this tremendous unlimited power to conduct guerrilla warfare like the Finns did against the Soviets in the Second World War, or something to the like. I think they're wrong. And I think that reality will show them to be wrong. And I think that experts should have learned better by now not to think that they understand President Donald Trump and not to measure him by the yardsticks that other US presidents have been measured by, because he isn't. He is different. And, we can debate style and content. And just last point about, Israeli topics. Here, I agree. Israel, as I think the president has said, we have real skin in the game. We live here. We are the ones who face Iranian attacks, and we are the ones who have been facing these attacks for the better part of 30-odd years by the Iranian regime. So yeah, definitely. We want to get rid of the terror organization that Iran funds. We want to get rid of their ballistic missiles. We want whoever governs Iran to stop dreaming about developing nuclear weapons to wipe the Zionist entity off the map. We want them to stop dreaming about wiping Israel off the map by the year 2040, which was an official Iranian goal and policy. And we would love for there to be diplomatic relations and trade and prosperity. So yeah, there are differences.
Okay. Norman Finkelstein, welcome back to Uncensored. Great to have you again. What is your response there?
Thank you for having me.
What is your response to what Jonathan Conrick has just outlined?
At long last, the home opener.
I can't wait to get there. It's the atmosphere.
I'm not a military person by training or by disposition, so I'm not going to make any prognostications about whether Israel will win in the short term, in the medium term, or the long term. And I believe that, in my opinion, is a separate question from what ought to be the right question to ask. If you were to go to a program in Germany during World War II, and there are various persons on debating, should Germany have invaded Russia? Was it smart to wage a two-front war? Will Germany be able to prevail over Russia in the short or in the long term? For most people, sane people, that is, that's an insane question. Maybe Germany could have defeated Russia, for all I know. Or maybe it was an error, as it turned out to be. The question is, was it just? Was it right? Who is in the right and who is in the wrong? Bad people win wars. That doesn't mean the war is right. Good people lose wars. That doesn't mean the good people are in the wrong. So let's look at the situation here. For 2.5 years, Israel waged what's called the crime of crimes. Israel waged a genocide in Gaza. And then, before even the blink of an eye, Israel launched what was called at Nuremberg the supreme international crime, the crime of aggression. So we have Israel and its chief enabler, the United States, guilty of the crime of crimes, the crime of genocide. And then, before even the blink of an eye, Israel and its chief enabler, the United States, waging the supreme international crime of aggression. In fact, on the latter point, the supreme international crime of aggression, there hasn't even been the attempt, the pretense, the pretext of a debate. There is no dispute whatsoever, none, that Israel and its chief enabler, the United States, are guilty of the supreme international crime of aggression in violation of Article 2 of the UN Charter, and for which it has no grounds whatsoever, zero grounds of self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter. That being the case, there can't be any dispute, none whatsoever, that Iran had the right and continues to have the right of self-defense against the supreme international crime of aggression. Now, it is true that the whole international system, as has been commented on in the last few months, in particular by the Prime Minister of Canada, but by many others, the whole international system of law has collapsed. The supreme international body for war and peace is the UN Security Council. And the UN Security Council failed in its responsibility to stop the war of aggression. That being the case, we have reverted from the state of law to the law of the jungle, or what's sometimes called the law, the state of nature. Now, under these circumstances, where the state of law is gone, the Security Council failed in its responsibility in a case of blatant, brazen, flagrant aggression against a member state of the United Nations. Then, if you look at the English philosopher John Locke, he says, Israel, the United States, they have turned into wild, savage beasts, guilty of the crime of crimes and the supreme international crime. They have become dangerous to mankind. And under those circumstances, says Locke, every man may restrain or, where it is necessary, destroy things noxious to them. And that's what these two states have become. They have become noxious to humanity. Destroying now Tehran, destroying Beirut, two Arab, in the case of Tehran, a Muslim and an Arab capital being destroyed.
Okay, but let me just...
It's not a war.
But Norman Figgleston, let me just jump in and ask you one question on that before I go back to Jonathan, which is, would you categorize the Iranian regime since 1979 as a noxious entity? Because to many people's eyes, whatever their view of the war, the general point of agreement is that this has been a pretty vile, repressive regime, which certainly lives up to the title of noxious. Would you be happy to say that it's been a noxious regime?
Imagine being able to build an app with your name on it just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44, a complete
I would say two things, and I'll say them in reverse order. The Iranian regime has been guilty of actions within its sovereign state that cannot be justified and which properly should be classified as crimes. Human rights, egregious human rights violations. About that, I have no doubt. However, number two, I want to establish priority. Priority is number one. The first point, egregious human rights violations. Number two, I don't believe the Iranian regime was ever given a chance to see how it would unfold between the crippling sanctions that were imposed on the Iranian government and then the huge amounts of money it had to subtract from civilian investment in order to counter, from its inception, the military threat posed by Israel and the United States.
Okay, let me...
meant that huge amounts of resources that might have gone to a better end were squandered because of the brutal sanctions and the threats of war.
Okay, Jonathan, just respond quickly to that point, to the 2 points there that which Norman Finkelstein said. Then I want to just talk to you about Joe Kent after that. So just respond to him on that.
Yeah, when I came on the show, I didn't know I was coming in for a lengthy, long-winded, long syllable word academic lecture, but I will be brief, and I will say that I think it's absolutely ridiculous. Back in 1979, the Islamic Republic of Iran is the aggressor. Ballistic and the previous one, the first one, have said so explicitly that it is their wish, their desire, their plan, their divine commitment to destroy what they action against the Iranian regime. It isn't launching a strike on the Iranian regime's ability to fire ballistics at Israel or at 10 or 11 other countries in the Middle East. It is that it took us so long and that we didn't do it earlier, and we could have saved thousands of Israelis, thousands of civilians that were murdered by Palestinians, by Syrians, by Lebanese, by other, this very evil empire of terrorism, which was the Iranian regime. And the only thing I regret is that only now Iran